I knew the moment I saw the manila folder in his hand that I was not getting promoted. Again. It was always the same routine. Same office. Same hour. Same forced tone in his voice, like he was trying to convince both of us that this was reasonable. But this time, something felt different. I had stopped hoping. Stopped even preparing for the possibility. That was the first sign. I sat in that stiff chair they never bothered to replace, the one with the mystery stain on the armrest, while Brian, my department head, slid the folder across his desk. His smile was too polished, too practiced, like he had been rehearsing it in the mirror. I had already opened 12 of those folders in the last 6 years, and I already knew what number 13 would say. "Kael," he started, and I felt my stomach knot. "You are an essential part of this team. But Q1 is not the best time for leadership changes," and I stopped listening. I had heard every version of this speech. Not the right quarter, leadership is watching, maybe next review cycle. Every time, the same look of sympathy from people who had never worked weekends the way I had. Never picked up the pieces when projects nearly collapsed. Never trained the person who would eventually become their manager. I nodded like I was supposed to, like a good employee, but something in me cracked, and before I could stop myself, I laughed. A short, sharp laugh that made Brian shift uncomfortably in his chair. "Something funny?" he asked, clearly thrown off. "Yes," I said, still smiling.
Me.
For believing this company would ever see me as more than convenient. That was the moment it all shifted. When I walked out of that office with that folder in my hand, I was not angry anymore. I was done. Done waiting. Done proving. Done hoping. That moment was not the end of something. It was the beginning. Oh, right. I should probably introduce myself. I am Kael. I was 34 when this happened. I worked as a product operations lead at a mid-sized enterprise software company called Halverson Dynamics. We sold workforce optimization tools to logistics and retail clients. Nothing fancy, but the stakes were always high. Millions in contracts. Tight client SLAs. And I was always the one they leaned on when it came time to clean up the mess. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. I had been at Halverson since I was 28, fresh out of a dying startup, grateful for stability, and eager to climb. I worked late, answered messages during vacations, and led initiatives outside my scope. They told me I was indispensable, but never enough to move forward. The irony. The promotion I had just been denied, number 13, went to someone named Iris. Iris had been at the company for less than a year. No operations background, but she had the right strategic lens, whatever that meant. I trained her, showed her how to navigate our systems. And then I got to sit in the same stained chair while they told me she was being fast-tracked. That evening, I walked home slower than usual, not out of sadness, but because I needed time to think, time to plan. I was not going to quit tomorrow.
No.
That would have been satisfying, but short-sighted. I wanted something bigger than an exit. I wanted proof. Proof that everything I had built, every system, every client relationship, every crisis I had resolved had value. And I wanted to take that value with me when I left. So I started preparing. Quietly. It began with documenting everything. Every process I had designed, every undocumented client quirk, every workaround. I compiled it all, but only for myself. No more uploading to the shared wiki. No more Kael will fix it at midnight. I stopped being the net that caught every falling task and started being a ghost, there but untraceable. Then I started meeting people. A contact from an old client had moved to a competitor. We got coffee. She introduced me to someone at a private firm that needed help optimizing internal operations. Then another. I never pitched myself. I just listened, took notes, learned. I did not need a new job yet. I needed options. At work, I kept smiling, kept showing up. But I had started to disconnect. Not in a bitter way, in a calculated one. I still hit every deadline. Still ran weekly stand-ups. But I stopped doing the extra things that made me a crutch. I stopped covering for others. I let them fail.
Gently.
Quietly. Over the next 3 months, I built a plan. I filed the paperwork for my own consultancy.
Just me, for now.
I called it Northmere Insight, a name that meant nothing, and yet sounded like it meant everything. I built a simple site. Got a logo. Nothing flashy, just legitimate. Enough to be taken seriously when the time came. The tipping point came one evening in May. A project Halverson had with one of our oldest clients, a transportation company based in Ohio, went sideways. The executive sponsor demanded a call with someone who actually understands the system. Guess who they asked for?
Me.
Iris was on the thread. So was Brian. I handled the call. Of course I did. But afterward, I forwarded the client a summary and blind copied my personal email. Just a record. Just in case. I gave Halverson 3 more months. I wanted time to secure 3 independent clients, build my savings buffer, and prepare for the storm I knew would follow. Because I was not just leaving a job. I was taking the foundation of half their client operations with me, the part they never documented, never appreciated, and never protected. When I finally resigned, I gave 2 weeks. No explanation. No counteroffer dance. Just a clean, formal letter. Brian was speechless. He asked me to think about it. I told him I already had. I walked out of that building on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in late July. I had no job. No health benefits. No paycheck lined up for August. But I had leverage. And I had myself. And 3 weeks later, Halverson called. The first message came through email. A short, vaguely friendly note from Brian, asking if I had time for a quick chat sometime this week. No subject line. No signature. Just 6 words and a calendar invite. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I deleted it. 3 days later, the call came. Not from Brian this time, from Denise, the director of enterprise accounts. Her voice was all forced calm, but I could hear the tightness behind it. Something was wrong. Kael, I heard you are consulting now. That is exciting. Listen, we're running into some issues with the writer implementation. Do you have time to maybe hop on a quick call with the team? Totally casual. I could have said no, but I did not. I asked her to send me the scope of the problem, for context, and I waited. What she sent me was chaos. They had tried to expand a critical client system without understanding the dependencies I had hard-coded into the original rollout. I warned them months before I left. Iris had signed off on the changes anyway. Now, Ryder's account team was threatening to cancel. The service contract alone was worth over $2 million annually. I sent Denise a 2-line reply. I am happy to help. My standard consulting rate is $240 per hour. Let me know if you need an agreement. There was no response for 24 hours. Then a signed engagement letter arrived. Just like that, I was back, but not as an employee. Not as someone they could call into a surprise meeting or pile midnight work on without notice. I was a consultant, on my own terms, charging them more in a week than I had made in a month. The writer fix took me 11 billable hours. I sent the invoice and got paid within 2 days. A week later, a new issue. This time with the Southeast Logistics client. Another rushed rollout. Another fire to put out. They paid me again. By the 3rd engagement, someone from Halverson's legal department sent me a casual email asking if I had signed any non-compete agreements during my time as an employee. I had not. I made sure of it before I ever filed my resignation. That little oversight on their part, the one they never cared about because they never saw me as someone who might leave, was now my shield. Meanwhile, Northmere Insight was gaining traction. 2 of the contacts I had met during my quiet planning period referred me to their internal operations teams. 1 client turned into 3, then 5. I hired a part-time assistant to help manage invoicing and communications. I built templates, systems, processes. Everything Halverson had ignored, I built deliberately. By October, I was working 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, and making more than I had in any month of full-time employment. I slept better. I ate better. I smiled, not because I had to, but because I finally felt like myself again. Then Halverson made their first real move. They asked me to come back. Not to fix a project. Not as a contractor. As an employee. a returning leader with a custom-built role and a generous package. Brian called me personally, said the company had realized gaps in internal expertise, and that bringing me back would mean a lot to the team. He sounded so sure I would say yes, so confident I still needed them, the way I once had. I told him I would think about it, and I did, for all of 30 seconds. What they were offering, the raise, the title, the illusion of respect, was years too late. They did not value me until my absence cost them more than my presence ever had. And even now it was not about me. It was about control. I declined the offer the next day in writing. No emotion. No explanation. Just a clear, final line. Brian replied with one word. Understood. It should have felt like a victory. Maybe it was. But it also reminded me of how much I had tolerated. How long I had convinced myself that things would eventually change. That if I just worked harder, kept my head down, stayed loyal, someone would notice. But no one had. Not until I left. My final act of closure came 2 weeks later. Ryder's regional director, the same account I had saved in July, reached out to me directly. They were cutting ties with Halverson after a series of failures post-departure. She wanted to know if I would be interested in submitting a proposal to replace their operations vendor. It was not just a win. It was a message. Northmere Insight signed the Ryder contract on a cool November morning. It was the biggest contract I had ever held, and I was holding it alone. I did not build my company out of revenge. Not really. I built it because I realized that waiting for recognition from people who had never seen me clearly was a kind of slow self-destruction. But seeing them scramble, watching them circle back, hat in hand, trying to buy back what they had thrown away, that part was satisfying. I thought that would be the end of it, but it was not. There was still more to come. 3 months passed. I thought maybe that was the end of it, that Halverson had finally moved on, cut their losses, and started trying to rebuild without me. But that is not how things played out. The first sign came from a former coworker, Tanya. We had not been especially close at the firm, but she reached out one afternoon through LinkedIn, asking if I had 10 minutes for a quick call. I said yes, mostly out of curiosity. She sounded nervous. Kael, you did not hear this from me, but things are a mess over here. They hired 2 people to try and replace your function. Neither of them lasted more than 5 weeks. Brian has been in meetings nonstop, and Iris? She is completely out of her depth. It is like they are finally realizing how much you actually held together. I thanked her and ended the call. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired, like I had already carried the weight of this story for too long. But Tanya was not the only one. Over the next few weeks, 2 more people from my former department reached out, one asking if I had any openings at Northmere Insight, the other just wanting to say, I get it now. Each conversation chipped away at something I had buried deep, the feeling that maybe for a long time I had not been crazy for feeling invisible. Halverson was unraveling. Internally, they had restructured twice. Denise had resigned. Kirsten, the one who leapfrogged past me after 8 months, had left for another firm, citing lack of strategic direction. Clients were pulling back. Revenue was down. Their reputation was beginning to crack. Then came the email that changed everything. It was from Vernon, the company's CEO. I had met him a handful of times in the past, always in passing. He was never directly involved in the day-to-day, never cared much about the people doing the real work unless a number on a report looked wrong. Now he was reaching out to me directly. The subject line, a conversation if you are open to it. The message itself was short, professional, vaguely flattering. Kael, I have been hearing quite a bit about the incredible work you are doing since your departure. I would very much appreciate the chance to discuss a potential opportunity to bring you back in a more strategic capacity. Our door is open. I stared at it for a long time. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done, just corporate politeness and an offer that came years too late. I forwarded the email to my assistant, Mia, and told her to send a standard reply. Thank you for your message. Kael is currently focused on existing client growth and is not exploring employment opportunities at this time. That was it. Simple. Final. But inside, It felt like I had closed a door that had once been bolted shut from the other side. 2 days later, Vernon called me personally. I did not answer. He tried again, this time from a private number. Still, I let it go to voicemail. The message was different from his email. Less formal. A little more desperate. Kael, I understand if there is some hesitation.
But we're serious about this.
Whatever your terms are, we are willing to discuss. I think you know your value now, and so do we. I saved the message. I did not return the call. Instead, I focused on building what I had started. Northmere Insight was growing faster than I had planned. By the end of the quarter, I had added 2 full-time consultants and was negotiating a strategic partnership with a mid-sized logistics firm. I had gone from being someone begging for recognition to someone who is now recognized by clients, partners, and even competitors on my own terms. And as for Halverson, I kept hearing stories. Their largest healthcare client left in January. An audit revealed multiple compliance issues tied to mismanaged accounts I had once handled personally. There were layoffs, budget cuts,
Panic.
At some point you stop feeling angry. The grief fades. The frustration burns out. All that is left is clarity. Clarity that they never truly saw me. That they never planned to. That they only wanted me back when I became useful in a new way. Not because they respected me, but because they needed to fix what they had broken. But I was not there to fix it anymore. Not for them. And yet this story was not just about Halverson. It was not even about revenge anymore. It was about something bigger, about learning how to stop chasing closed doors. About building new ones, in places no one thought to look. And right as I began to feel peace settle in, I received one more call. But this time, it was not from Halverson. It was from someone else, someone I never expected to hear from again. Someone who would change the direction of everything I had built for better or for worse. The name that flashed across my phone screen made me sit still for a moment. It was not Halverson. It was not someone from the consulting world. It was Rena Calder. If you have never worked in corporate strategy circles, her name might not mean anything. But to me, to anyone who had ever fought for a seat at a boardroom table, Rena was legend. Former COO of a global retail giant. Now running a tight, elite advisory firm that consulted directly with boards and top executives across multiple industries. We had crossed paths once, years ago, at a leadership development event where I was just another mid-level analyst trying to blend in. She gave a keynote. I asked a question during Q&A. She stayed back after to talk to a small group of us. I remembered her words clearly. If you wait for someone to offer you power, you have already lost it. I never imagined she would remember me, let alone call me. But there she was, reaching out directly. Not through an assistant. Not through LinkedIn. Calling my personal number. I answered. Her voice had not changed. Steady. Sharp. Warm. But no nonsense. I have been watching the way you handled Halverson, she said. Someone on my team forwarded me your writer case study. I do not usually make direct offers, but I think we should talk. It turned out she was expanding. Her firm, Calder Strategic, had recently launched a discrete initiative focused on rescuing failing internal strategy functions inside major corporations. She needed someone who could lead those engagements, fix the unfixable, and do it with both tactical skill and emotional intelligence. Your story tells me you can do more than follow process, she said. It tells me you know how to navigate power. It was not a job interview. It was a chess move.
She offered me a strategic partnership.
Not employment. A collaborative seat at the table, on equal footing. I would keep my firm. She would direct high-profile clients my way, and in return, I would lead certain initiatives under her umbrella. I did not say yes right away. I asked for time. Not because I was unsure, but because I had learned the value of not reacting out of excitement. I had trained myself to pause. To think. That night, I went back and reread the email Halverson had sent me months earlier, the one that offered me a custom-built role if I came back.
It felt small now.
Not even tempting. The next day, I called Rena and said yes. That partnership changed everything. Overnight, the level of clients I worked with shifted. I was sitting in private meetings with boards, advising C-suite leaders, auditing billion-dollar operations. It was the kind of work I had once dreamed of, but could never even glimpse inside Halverson. And what shocked me the most? I was good at it. Better than good. Every time I walked into a meeting, I brought with me the years of being underestimated, overlooked, talked over, and passed by. I understood power not because I had always had it, but because I knew what it felt like to live without it. 6 months into the partnership, I was managing 4 critical turnarounds. One of them was a logistics firm that Halverson had tried, and failed, to land the year before. At one point during a client review, the CFO leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, Halverson pitched us last year.
They were fine.
But I see now why you came so highly recommended." I did not respond. I just nodded, because there was nothing left to prove. Meanwhile, I kept getting small updates about Halverson through former colleagues. One quietly shut down a regional office. Another lost a major contract to a competitor I had referred a client to. Iris had stepped down. Brian was on leave. Vernon had stopped taking external interviews. I never gloated. I never posted about it. I did not need to. Revenge, I had come to realize, was not a dramatic moment. It was quiet. It was a choice. A long, steady refusal to let bitterness drive your decisions. It was saying no when you could say yes just to be polite. It was building something so strong that even your silence was a statement. One afternoon, while waiting for a meeting to start, I opened my inbox and saw a new message. It was from Tanya, the same woman who first warned me months ago. The subject line, "You were right." Inside was a single sentence. "We all thought you were overreacting. Now we all wish we had followed you out the door." I stared at those words for a long time. I had spent so much of my life wondering if I was wrong. If maybe I was too sensitive, too ambitious, too much. Now, those same people were seeing the truth I had known all along. I did not reply. I did not need to. Because I was not living in that story anymore. I was writing a new one. And just when I thought it could not get any more full circle, something else happened. A familiar logo appeared on the pre-meeting briefing packet for a new engagement Calder Strategic had just on board. It was Halverson. Not as a client, but as a case study. A cautionary example of mismanaged talent and lost internal value. The briefing was for a board-level advisory session. And Rena? She had invited me to co-lead it. I arrived at the meeting 20 minutes early. It was not nerves. I had learned to stop shrinking in rooms I used to feel unworthy of. But that day, I needed a moment, not to prepare, but to remind myself of how far I had come. The boardroom was quiet.
Polished.
Expensive, but in that impersonal, glass and steel way. The kind of space meant to intimidate. I stood at the far end of the long table, thumbing through the briefing deck. It was surreal. Page after page detailed Halverson's decline, missed growth targets, leadership turnover, compliance gaps, strategic misfires. The narrative was cold, analytical, but I could read between the lines. Every metric that had once been held together by my late nights, every bullet point that now seemed like an abstract problem. I had lived it. I had warned them about it. They had chosen to ignore me. Now, I was here to explain to their board exactly how they got it wrong. Rena arrived just before the board members trickled in. She glanced at me, gave the faintest smile, and said, "You ready?" I nodded. More than ever. The presentation itself was straightforward. We outlined systemic gaps in leadership, outlined misalignment between internal capabilities and external promises, and recommended a phased restructure starting from the top. I delivered my section calmly, directly, without performance. And when I spoke about the company's pattern of promoting visibility over substance, how it eroded institutional knowledge and trust, I made no mention of myself. I did not need to. One board member interrupted. "Are you saying their most valuable operators were ignored because they were too good at quietly keeping things from falling apart?" I met his eyes. That is exactly what I am saying. When the session ended, most of the board stayed behind to discuss recommendations with Rena. I gathered my notes quietly, ready to leave, when a voice I had not heard in nearly a year broke through the room. "Kael." It was Vernon. He had been silent throughout the presentation, seated near the corner, listening but not speaking. Now he approached like someone trying not to look like they were approaching. He looked different. Older, though only a year had passed. Tired in a way that made it clear the damage at Halverson had been personal for him, too. "I did not know you were involved," he said. "I am not," I said. "Calder Strategic is." He gave a dry laugh, not sure how to respond. Then, in a lower voice, "I meant what I said, months ago, about wanting you to come back. We were short-sighted. I was. I did not say anything. I just let the silence stretch." He glanced around, like someone checking to see if they were about to embarrass themselves. "I do not expect you to say yes. But if there is ever a future where we can work together again, in any capacity, I hope you'll consider it." I nodded politely. I appreciate the sentiment. Then I walked out. No dramatic goodbye. No sarcastic last word. Just the clean, quiet satisfaction of knowing I no longer needed anything from them. Not their praise. Not their money. Not even their regret. Outside, the sun was sharp against the glass tower. I felt light.
Steady.
I headed back to my office, where Mia handed me a short list of new client leads. One of them was a healthcare system I had supported years ago at Halverson. They were now looking to shift all consulting work to my firm. I signed the engagement that afternoon. A few weeks later, I was at a small leadership event when a young woman approached me. Nervous but eager. She said she had followed my story. She had seen a clip of my interview on Rena's podcast. She was considering quitting her job. She had just been passed over for the third time and wanted to know how I knew when it was time to leave. I told her the truth. You will never get permission from the people who benefit from your silence. Sometimes, you just have to take yourself seriously before anyone else will. She blinked hard, nodding slowly. I saw it in her eyes, that flicker of belief, that moment where you stop asking for permission and start making decisions. That was it. That was the real revenge. Not making them beg me to come back, but becoming the person they never thought I could be, without them. The person I was always meant to be. Not just seen, respected, not just kept, needed. But the best part? I did not need them anymore. I never really did.